Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar. We're so excited to present to you our fifth webinar today, Building Strength, Inspiring Hope, a Plan for Shifting Cultural Competency in Practice by Dr. Linda Cognitiman. As part of our Bringing Communities Together Around Brain Health and Aging, hosted by the Social Planning Council of Ottawa. My name is Sybil Briganza, coordinator of the Ethnocultural Seniors Program at the Social Planning Council. Before we begin, I would like to thank our funders, Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and New Horizons for Seniors Program. Today's webinar will look at the experience of racialized community, the impact of immigration, racism as a determinant of health, and what cultural competency resembles at an individual and institutional level. The agenda for today will start off with a presentation by Dr. Linda Cognitiman. Just a few housekeeping rules. Please mute yourself. We will have time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. Just have your questions on the Q&A or the chat button, and we will respond to them as we go along. All of these webinars will be recorded and uploaded on our website, Ottawa Community Partnership for Health Equity. Associated resources will also be posted there. Going forward, we have two more webinars planned, which will be held the next two Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. You can check us on our website or sign on them for Eventbrite. Once again, thank you for attending. We have a little rainy day today, but I hope you're going to enjoy the presentation. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Linda Cognitiman. She is in Calgary right now, and it's pretty early up there for her. So Dr. Linda Cognitiman is a provincial manager in addictions and mental health. She holds a PhD in social work and is an instructor at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Calgary. Linda played a vital role in the development of Canada's national standards of cultural and linguistic competency. She has also written extensively on the subject of cultural competency in healthcare, presented on the topics worldwide, and is a much sought after clinical consultation. Linda is a very well-renowned social worker in the field of cultural competency, and it gives me great pleasure, Linda, to introduce you today. Thank you, and I hand it over to Linda. Thank you very much for attending too.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Sybil. Sybil and I go way, way back, doing lots of work together in Canada. And so I feel very privileged to be asked to do this talk. I feel very privileged to be in this position to be talking to all of you. So thank you for everybody that's in attendance today. And I'm hoping that this journey that we will take on this morning for the next 90 minutes is something where you can learn, something where I can learn. I'm not coming to this as someone who perceives herself to have to be better, to have the most experience, to know it all. I'm coming with a heart of learning. I really would like to learn from myself as much as I'm learning from you in this conversation. So thank you for having me. So when we were discussing what is it that we would like to talk about, one of the things that we looked at was building strength, inspiring hope, a plan for shifting cultural competency in practice. And there are some people who are for or against cultural competency. My idea is that you pick something, you work with it until you can't work with it anymore. Then maybe you drop it, but you don't drop something because other people have comments about it or because some things don't work well. Because if you drop something when things get challenging, we will never get to the other side. So the two sessions that I will be doing are divided in two modules. Today is the first module, and next week we continue. For you to get the full benefit out of this, it would be great if you could attend both. So now see how I'm bribing you in terms of where you need to be October 6th, 10 a.m. on Ontario time. So before we continue, I just want to honor traditional territory. I know we are in online virtual land, and because of COVID, but also because this is how we're doing business right now. I'm in Calgary, so I would like to honor where I live and where I work. So, as a Black immigrant woman, I respectfully acknowledge the land on which I work, where work is the unceded traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nation, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and Stoney Nakoda. The traditional Blackfoot name of this place, now known as the city of Calgary, is Mukonsissis. With that, I would like to continue my presentation. So today, or in general, with what we would like to achieve by, how we've set it out, is we really would like to look at increasing the understanding and the importance of valuing diversity in the workplace. Now, there's a lot of lip service around it. This seems so broad. So that's why we're going to dig deeper to enhance the inclusion of cultural competent practices in service provision, to assess how our attitudes, our knowledge, and skills may impact practice outcomes with racialized communities. And that particular part we're going to be focusing on next week. For today, I really would like to dismantle, deconstruct the experiences of racialized communities. What does it look like? What's happening in terms of that? The impact of immigration for people on a professional, institutional, and personal level. We also would like to go into racism as a determinant of health. We would like to look at ending the conversation with why do we need to then think about cultural competency, and why is it important to look at it from an individual and institutional level. So we'll touch on it, and then next Tuesday, we're gonna continue. So I would like to hand it over to Mylene to help me with 4 polling questions right now, and then we're gonna continue the session. So if you look at your screen, if you could select an answer based on question number 1, and then submit. So as you can see on your screen, in terms of the first question, I'm racialized and an ally supporting cultural competency. Um, we see that 29% of individuals have identified that. And then the next question, I'm not racialized and want to understand the issues facing racialized people and learn more about cultural competency. We have 66% who have identified that, and 7% of participants have identified they have not heard about this topic before. So you might wonder, why is it important to have a polling like this? Um, for one, it is good to know who's part of the audience. Two, it's good to know who wants to invest time in learning. It's good to know who's in different positions and which localities we all embody. So it's a good start. I might ask Mylene to pull it up again at the end so that we could really talk about why it was important to look at this. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the polling. It really helps to focus on that. So I know that Sybil did a great introduction of how I would be introduced in an academic way. Ma mitatada amanakio hea kai mi Linda abidawan sama ka kio. Mimma bedewan pamakaumang am mokishanga luku. Ik ben in Suriname geboren. Minawang kangkang sranang umang. Now, with 5 sentences, I highlighted the 4 languages that I speak and that I come from. I told you a little bit about myself. One, in my dad's language, I said that his name was Amanakio and his full name is Humphrey Panza, and he named me Linda. In my mom's language, at least one of them, she comes from 2 particular tribes, I used her Pamaka language to identify that she was Pamaka and Aluku. I then said in Dutch, which is the main language in education, in the professional world in Suriname, where I was born, that I was born in Suriname. And in Surinamese, the most common language that's spoken amongst Surinamese people, I identified that I am a strong Surinamese woman. Now, you might wonder, why is it important for her to use her languages as we don't understand them? There might be 1 or 2 people online that did, I'm not quite sure. But I'm starting that to center ourselves in terms of how it feels like for individuals to not be able to use their language in spaces that they occupy. There are many Indigenous people in Canada who have lost their language. There are many immigrant refugees, people from racialized backgrounds who cannot use their language from one reason or the other. And it started from when they came and settled into Canada. Now, intersectionality, belonging, and knowing who you are is quite important when you are trying to do this particular work. So for me, knowing where my father comes from, knowing my mother's roots, knowing the languages they speak, my journey to the United States and then to Canada, my intersectionality in terms of being a mother of 2 children born in Canada, beautifully gifted with music and art. Although I wanted them to be academically different, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing for their lives. A wife, I'm an aunt, I'm a sister, I'm a grandma, I'm a Black female professor, I'm PhD trained, in a position of middle management. I'm vice president and co-founder of YEPI Foundation, and I'm a consultant. All these particular components are what makes me who I am. And if I can't use who I am every single day, every minute, it does something to me. And if people use the fact that I am Black, of the fact that English isn't my first language, the fact that I was not born in this country, to hold that against me, it does something to me. So who I am, who other people are, who you are, really defines how you work with people, how you see people, how you perceive people's issues, and how you position yourself, especially in a position of power, to be impactful. I start with that because it's really important. And so for me, just like I journeyed to Canada, and it is important to understand what's happening. I also want to say that this quote, I really want us to reflect on it, because it says, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. In practice, there is. So for me, what I learn and what I read, when I see it, I need to be able to merge the two, to be able to practice well with individuals. Because what I learn, if I can't put it in practice, I won't be able to do the things that I need to do. So going back one slide, to truly know others, you must first know yourself. First and foremost, very important. Two, you need to know what's happening with people. You need to know where people are coming from. You need to know who you are. The component of knowledge is very important, so that you can transfer that into practice. For this to happen, we need to know who we are serving. We need to know the families we're working with, so that we can integrate our beliefs, our values, our traditions, our worldviews in the type of practice that we engage in. So, why is it important? What does it mean to have skills to work with people from different backgrounds, from racialized background, from ethnic background, from different socioeconomic backgrounds? What does it mean to have the skills, and why is it important? Ask yourself those questions. I'm just gonna pause for a second, because people aren't able to see my screen. Can people see my screen now? Perfect. Thank you. Technology is awesome. Perfect. So sorry about the first, you didn't miss much. Now we're getting into the meat of stuff. So you're good. Here's another reflection question. How does pre-migration, migration, and post-migration affect the well-being of immigrants and refugees? What is the role of service providers in supporting immigrants and refugees. Let's just pause on this question for a second, just to get people back on track. Now, by response, if you use your chat box, how would you respond to this question? The first one: how does pre-migration, migration, and post-migration affect the well-being of immigrants and refugees? How would you answer this? We'll just take 1 minute to see what people would say on the chat box. And the following question is: what is the role of service providers in supporting immigrants, refugees with illness and wellness? Anybody? Okay. I could see some people responding with loss, change, transitions, feeling isolated, fear, anxiety. Changes are sometimes welcomes, but most of the times it turns into an obstacle. Very good. Okay. Differences depending, challenges of settlement. People feel like they're in survival mode. Stress, fear, loneliness, emotional paralysis. I like that, because just the fact that you're feeling like you can't do anything, and people can't focus on their well-being. The loss of control, that's a big one. And you see it specifically with men. A sense of belonging and acceptance, a state of uncertainty, unsettlement, and change, and navigating the system and environment to learn new norms and cultural tradition, culture shock, regardless of where you come from, caught between two different cultures, understanding background and history of clients and providing services and needs. So there is an array of things that can happen to people. The mental health of people continues to be a major health issue for refugees. So all the things you've identified, then think about it being compounded by mental health issues, because you're being uprooted, because people overwork themselves to be able to give to their kids, because they can't find the resources, or the resources weren't tailored to their needs. So, with racialized individuals, immigrants, and refugees, or even other groups, the long term implications for their health is really dependent on successful settlement. If something goes wrong when you're uprooted to get to a particular country, it depends on how your settlement has gone. So refugees, unlike immigrants, sometimes are exposed to a lot of other higher levels of stress, of pre-migration trauma, and many studies have pointed to long-term, 5 to 10 years post-settlement, prevalence of common mental illness such as depression, anxiety, and ongoing PTSD. The literature also shows that among refugees, the prevalence of mental illness in the first generation is 30% higher among the second generation children born to children as well. So the effect of pre-migration, migration, and post-migration cannot be underestimated, especially with refugee. And with the major settlement of refugees over the past few years, we need to be able to understand what we as service providers can do to support people. which ties in nicely with the next slide, because the next slide talks about what makes Canadians sick. And this is where I transition the conversation a bit into the social determinants of health to give us that perspective of how this is impacting us as Canadians, us as individuals. So when we look at what is it that could make us sick, 50% of our lives depends on our income, how much we make, what happens in early childhood, abilities or disability, education, social exclusion, social safety net, gender, employment, your working conditions, your race, your Aboriginal status or Indigenous status, safe and nutritious food, and housing, homelessness, community belonging. 50% of how we feel and how we do depends on this. 25% is very attached to your healthcare. So access to healthcare, the wait times you might be experiencing, especially when you need surgery or when there's a health need, and then everything else around the healthcare system. 15% depends on your biology. Now, at my age, I'm thinking it's 50% definitely right now in terms of my biology and my genetics, etc. But that's up for discussion. 10% our environment. How is the air quality where you live? How is the civic infrastructure? How is water access, etc., etc. So when we think about what impacts people's health, think about it in this way. And there's lots of research that's gone into it. So these social determinants of health have been well researched. And so one example that I put up here is the Global Commission on the Social Determinants of Health final report, Closing the Gap in a Generation, the Health Equity through Actions on the Social Determinants of Health. You'll have access to the references when this is posted by Sybil. So as I've talked about before, so education and income distribution, unemployment, employment and working conditions, early childhood development, ethnicity, indigenous background, social exclusion, gender, and then material things such as housing, workplace, food security. And we also notice with COVID, people who are unable to work in their home also have then other added stress in this time. But things like your health behaviors, such as tobacco use, alcohol use, physical activity, healthy eating, and then psychological factors such as stress, then human biology and genetics, healthcare systems, access to health services. All of these things impact individuals. And then you can ask yourself then, what is the impact of poverty? Why are the social determinants of health important when we're looking at cultural competency? Well, because all of these things impact people, we need to be able to understand them. Remember, I said theory and practice, what you know and how it can help people. This is part of it. Because we need to understand for each individual that we work with, what is the impact of contaminants? How can it impact health? What is the best length of staying in care? If services are not accessible to people, how does it impact people? Why are teenagers or individuals attracted to smoking? What are the different intervention strategies that you could use? All these things are important. How far is my location away from people to access my services? Does the federal government recognize that the national health research infrastructures need to be reorganized? So these are all important questions to help people. So the primary factors that shape healthy conditions for Canadians are not just mere medical treatments or lifestyle choices, but it is rather the living conditions that individuals experience. All these living conditions have become to known as the social determinants of health. Many of us are largely unaware that our health, the way we are, is shaped by income, by how wealth is distributed, whether or not we have a good job, we're employed or not, whether or not the working conditions we experience day to day cause us stress. Our health is also determined by the health and social services we receive and our ability to obtain education, food, housing, among other factors, of course. And contrary to the assumption that Canadians have personal control over these factors, in most cases, these living conditions, for better or for worse, are imposed upon us by the quality of the community and housing situations, the work settings, the health, the social services agencies, your organization, the educational institutions, what they're teaching, and which we interact, in which the people we love interact. So, if we would like to make changes improving this, it requires we start thinking about health and the determinants in a more sophisticated manner than what has been done before to date. The social determinants of health for you, for the people you engage with, the people you support are very important. Think about that. In Canada, it's well researched. This particular book that I put up, I really like Dennis Raphael's work. There is a short video online that you could go to and look at. And so when you think about the social determinants of health, we're going to really look at it from this perspective, this simple story. Why is Jason in the hospital? Because he has a bad infection in his leg. But why does he have an infection? Because he has a cut on his leg and it got infected. But why does he have a cut in his leg? Because he was playing in the junkyard next to his apartment building and there was some sharp, jagged steel there that he fell on. But why was he playing in a junkyard? Because his neighborhood is kind of run down. A lot of kids play there and there's no one to supervise them. But why does he live in that neighborhood? Because his parents can't afford a nicer place to live. But why can't his parents afford a nicer place to live? Because his dad is unemployed and his mom is sick. But why is his dad unemployed? Because he doesn't have much education and he can't find a job. But why? The challenge we're having in looking at the social determinants of health is how it's being approached in research. When we look at populations, when we look at communities and we start teasing out what's happening to them, we see that if you start deconstructing what is happening to people based on the social determinants of health, it will be easier for you to identify the root causes by asking the questions why. This is in an effort to support the communities, to support the individuals, to find flexible solutions for complex problems. People are complex. Problems are complex. We can't just use a band-aid. We can't just use a cookie cutter approach. So here we are focusing on the root causes by looking at it from the perspective of the determinants of health. So some terminologies that I would like to look at is um, traumatic stressors, what it is. Stressor in general is a situation or even appraised as aversive. It elicits a stress response that comprises activation or use of psychological resources and may provoke a subjective state of physical or mental tension. I just need some water, sorry. So think about trauma and stressors as we continue. Um, the next thing that I would like to move into is really talking about racism as a social determinant of health, because we went through the other aspect, but sometimes we forget that for racialized people, one of the biggest determinants of health is racism. So I know that language says stereotype, prejudice, racial prejudice are things that we know, but it's good to put them up so we have an understanding about them. I'm not going to say too much about them. With racism, it is a socially constructed ideology. Right now, people talk about racism a lot. So I don't have a doubt we do know what it means. There are some people who say there's no racism in Canada. By now, maybe I would say I beg to differ because it is in existence. If you look at the formate, um, indigenous reserves. But even the conversation, the discussion that there was never slavery in Canada, there's facts about that. If you need some of that, I can provide it to you, but I didn't want to go into too much because a lot has been on the news and a lot has been happening. There is racism in Canada. If there was someone who has a doubt about it, stop being doubtful, because with what we've been seeing, experiencing, especially recently, it is a fact. It is a fact because even the federal government is trying to address it in different ways, through different means. And there's lots of literature that's out there. So people could have said, well, that's years ago. But even with recent updated research, recent updated statistics, it shows that where we're at in terms of racism in the country. So not just in Ottawa, it's also in Calgary, it's in all our provinces. It's something that we're experiencing on a daily basis. I put these screenshots because it's very, we're living it on a day-to-day basis. And so there's lots of work that's being done. This is an example of work and resources in Ottawa and the one before. There's a lot of talk about over-policing on Black and Indigenous lives. And one of the things that I remember having to do with my children is really sitting them down and talking to them about, if they are pulled over, what to do. And you might think, oh, that just happens in the US. Think again, this happens in Canada as well. Just last Sunday, there was an unveiling of in Chinatown of a mural by a Black artist. And before it was completed, this individual went through a lot of issues because he was being harassed, name calling, it was canceled at one point. A lot of issues happened to it. So we're quite excited in Calgary that it was unveiled, but it didn't happen without problems. Just recently in some of the smaller towns in Alberta, there has been lots of protest against individuals who are advocating for the well-being of racialized people in Alberta. These are some references that you will have access to at the end of the presentation. And this is another screenshot in terms of how we're trying to point fingers to the US, that it only happens in the US. It doesn't happen in Canada, but we need to think about it. So having shown all of that, this is me just building in terms of where we're going. I really would like to talk about how this impact people in Ontario or people in general. So specifically in Ontario, there is a higher rate of diabetes, higher rate of hypertension, higher rate of psychosis for the Black community specifically. It's also identified that with women who are from different backgrounds, especially Black women in Ontario, they're 1.7 times higher. They have a higher rate of hypertension, 60% higher rates of psychosis among segments of the Black population compared to the general population. And then also some trends of cardiovascular diseases are a risk among South Asian, Chinese, and Black groups in Ontario. And the disparities in access to quality care is really rampant as well. So when we look at the impact of that racism has on people, it has a direct impact on people's physical body. So people could be impacted by being injured physically. Racism has an impact to when people are unable to have engagement with healthy behavior, or they adopt unhealthy behaviors as well, such as substance use. This could be directly caused because of stress or coping, or indirectly because of self-regulation. There also could be other issues, other impacts that people might experience, such as the lack of housing and education and increased exposure. I'll never forget this example that was provided to me by an Indigenous person when he went to rent an apartment. He went to several apartments to rent, and it was denied because of the fact that he was Indigenous. And finally, at the end, he was told that he will bring his kind to the building, even if he was an upstanding citizen. He would bring his kind to the apartment, and that would cause problems for the apartment, for the owner of the apartment. So just imagine trying to access housing and you're unable to. My experience with that was not in Canada. It was in the US. When my husband and I moved to do graduate work in the US, we couldn't understand why we couldn't get an apartment. And one of the students who was there years before us, we heard him talk to the building owner, and he said something about if you're unable to provide it because they're Black. And I was astounded. And it's not that my Blackness has never impacted me in my country of origin. It impacted me differently, not in terms of accessing a place to live in the middle of winter. When we moved to the US, it was in December in Colorado, lots of snow. We couldn't continue to stay in a hotel. So when you think about racism as a determinant of health, think about how racial discrimination then may impact an individual. This visual is taken from Paradis et al. In their publication of Racism as a Determinant of Health, a protocol for conducting a systemic review. So as a service provider, we need to know how it impacts the health of people. So when someone goes through racial discrimination, if it's through assault, physical injury, it impacts the physical health. It may impact outcomes such as cardiovascular disease. With women, decreased birth weight. In fact, there are studies that show that specifically Black women who go through racism have decreased birth weight kids. Increased blood pressure, physical injury. When someone goes through racial discrimination and has psychological stress, they could go through symptoms of psychological symptoms such as anxiety, depression, substance use. They could go through negative coping behaviors and other psychological stress response that may impact their blood pressure, low birth weight for kids, cardiovascular diseases, and physical injury. When people go through racial discrimination and they're denied resources such as housing, they might have poorer living conditions. If it's other resources, they might experience decreased quality of access to care. And it doesn't have to be just healthcare. It could be any social services. With that come anxiety, depression, substance use, or misuse. So these stressors all have psychological impact. They then have an impact on misuse or abuse of substances, and people cannot get to optimal health, and other areas are being impacted. So just imagine if I go through racial discrimination because of not being able to access services, or I'm in school and one of my professors oppress me and uses everything that is possible to not make me advance. The the psychological symptoms that I will portray are anxiety and depression, which could cause me to drop out of school. So when we talk about how can we address this, you can't just say the services that I have in my organization is enough and we provide quality services to everybody. We need to be able to understand how this could impact individuals. It's not just the pre-migration and migration issues, oppression and racism added to pre-migration, migration, and post-migration issues impact individuals to the point that they're unable to live an optimal life, optimal in their own way in Canada. So when you think you're providing optimal services, think about how does this come across? So trauma impacts people as we have identified. The barriers that people then continue to experience could be prematurely in terms of accessing services. So not just mental health services, but all services in general, but also dropping out of school, isolating themselves, and you name it. Because if I ask you right now to list a few, you will be able to list them. And some of the other barriers that people face is the fact that some organizations aren't set up to meet their needs. So cultural awareness, cultural competency, some other individuals go to the experience of not accessing the services as they should. And then there are the understanding of what happens within the community. What is the ethnic concept? What is the cultural concept of what people are going through? So to be able to address this, the biggest thing is having the knowledge about what's happening. So for one, history has shown us that courage can be contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. This is a quote from Michelle Obama. And the reason I took this quote is because we're not just focusing on what has happened 200 years ago in Canada. We're not just focusing on why it happens. We're focusing on the 100 plus courageous people who are sitting right now at this webinar to look at what has happened, how can we use it to advance what we're doing. That's why you're here. We're not just here to listen to what has happened, but we're courageous enough to think about hope. Think about the title of the session, of the two sessions. We're courageous enough to be here. We're courageous enough to know that with recovery for people with optimal health, there is the hope that we can provide. And as individuals who are here, you and I, it is because we're courageous enough to be here. And courage is contagious. So then with courage, we then need to be able to look at what are some modalities that we could put in place to support people. For me, what makes sense is cultural competency, because it provides me with an understanding how to support people. Some people talk about all kinds of other modalities that might help them. But in terms of service provision, cultural competency makes sense to me. To start out, sometimes the word competency intimidates people. So what I would like to say is, being culturally competent doesn't mean you have knowledge of the cultural background of everyone you provide services to. It's about having a particular set of behaviors and attitudes and policies that can help you to support people. It enables systems, it enables individuals to do their work more effectively in cross-cultural situation. For me, cultural competency is a journey. Remember at the beginning, I highlighted that we are on a journey. The journey is not just 90 minutes. For me, the journey is the rest of my life. Every single day, I learn more, I adapt more, I make more mistakes, and I learn from my mistakes. But through these processes of understanding my own feelings, my own attitudes, my biases that I have, the perceptions I have in terms of particular communities, I am able to address them. I'm able to not pretend that I am something I'm not. And so in providing the discussion about cultural competency, we need to look at, how do I do it? What do I need to put in place? What does my organization need to put in place for me? What is it based on? And what is the basis in terms of supporting people? On a more practical based level, cultural competency is the ability of individuals and systems to respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, backgrounds, races, ethnic backgrounds, and religions in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the cultural differences and similarities and the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. And so when we talk about cultural competency, some people might say, well, Linda, I am culturally sensitive. Cultural sensitivity implies the dominance of our culture over others. Cultural competency, on the other hand, implies equality of cultures. Cultural competency is about creating a system, an environment that is free of racism, that is free of stereotypes, where all people are treated with empathy, dignity, and respect. And I know when I talk about cultural competency, people say, well, it's not possible. How is this possible? No one can be competent. Hence the word. You're trying. You're trying to be on a path to get somewhere. I agree with people because the focus is not to achieve it in this 90 minutes or achieve it in all the work you've done before. It is a lifelong process. It's something to strive forward. It's something to continue to be better in. It's an everyday look into who you are and adjust your services, adjust the environment to meet the needs of the people you're working with. So when we meet next week, we're going to talk about cultural competency on the individual level and looking at your own personal assumption, your values, your beliefs, what it entails, and looking at how your cultural and linguistic background impacts the services you provide. We will also be able to look at cultural competency from an organizational perspective. And so how, as an organization, we can ensure that the diversity that you bring in, that everybody else brings in, can be used to effectively and successfully address a diverse workforce, decision-making, innovation, and adaptability. And then we're going to be looking at how can we then start or continue the process of being culturally competent. What are the practical implications? So looking at that, we need to think about becoming more familiar of issues of oppression, becoming more confident and comfortable in talking about the social determinants of health as not something that is out there, but something that needs to be brought in the encounter with people. And then looking at, yes, I know a lot about income and housing and poverty, but hey, I never stop to think about how racism can impact an individual in such a way that they're stressed and anxious and that it impacts their optimal well-being. And the reason I bring it forward is you need to know this, because remember, you need to know theory, bring it in practice. You need to know what people experience, because if you don't know that particular piece, you won't be able to understand how to address it. So exploring racial and ethnic networks and resources in your community for yourself, to help other people, is very important. Empathizing and sympathizing with individuals when they talk about their experiences, use active listening. Stay with tough emotions for individuals. Share your feelings. If you have or haven't experienced it, be open. If you have, share it. Respect an individual that is sharing their experiences of racism intervene on behalf of other people. Because if you've identified the polling that was done at the beginning, I think it's 69% of people or 67% of people were non-racialized, but very interested in looking at this issue. So for us to really think about how is this topic important to get to cultural competency, we can't get to cultural competency without knowing how this impacts the total being of an individual. If you would like to work with me, you need to know who I am and what I'm experiencing. You need to know all the components and my intersectionality. And I understand from Sybil that intersectionality was addressed. So to be able to do that, we need to all work together and know it. So, sorry, I need some water. Bear with me. So we're gonna just quickly watch a video. It's 4 minutes about, and then I'll draw from it. The full video is called The Danger of a Single Story. I really would like you at some point to review the full video. But for right now, I just would like to show a short clip about the video. And it will take you to listen carefully because the sound wasn't great when we started. So let's hope it works. If it doesn't work, it's not a problem.
19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless them sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political world, stories too are defined by the principle of nkali. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Mourid Barghouti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and to start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story.
True Earth is helping remove
Okay. So I wanted to now put this up, and the main thing I want to get out of this is the danger of a single story. Canada is an amazing country. This is my country of choice. This is the country where I had my children. This is the country where I will live. I have chosen to be here. Some other people were forced to live here. Others were born here. We welcome hundreds, if not thousands of people in Canada every single year. We need to remember that when we welcome people, we need to be careful with not lumping them, all of us, everybody, in one story, because everybody comes very unique. Everybody comes with their own traditions. I remember one time years ago, I'm talking about probably 18 years ago, I heard this story of a white nurse who came to Canada to work. And after a few months, she packed up and she was moving back to the US. And someone asked her, "Why are you moving? Canada is such an amazing place, and we're so friendly and welcoming." And this white nurse said, "Canadians are friendly up to their front door." So think about it. Today, I'm not talking about how one group perceives the other, or how particular things happen. I'm talking about the experiences that we could change as a country for everybody who lives in this country. I'm talking about the impact that oppression and racism has about on the health of people. I'm talking about the skills that we all, including me, need to be able to address these issues. So when we're doing that, we need to think about individuals as individuals. We need to think about communities as what they bring as a whole, in terms of using a single story to qualify everybody. So as welcoming as we are, let's welcome too the thoughts of how we can help people by understanding how racism is a determinant of health, how racism impacts people, what our personal responsibilities are, and how we could support the organizations that we are all individually part of to address issues for people. Someone put in the box, we must open the doors. No, someone put in this box, cultural humility is required when the majority hears stories. Thank you for putting that in. A social worker by the name of a Canadian social worker, Rosemary Brown, wrote this. We must open the doors and we must see to it they remain open so that others can pass through. Um, Rosemary Brown is amazing in terms of what she does as an individual in Canada. So for us as service providers, we have an opportunity to open our services up for people. And we would like it to remain open so that people can come through daily and as needed, even if it's virtual at this point. The way we can do it is to get to know people. And finally, I would like to end with, when we're addressing issues, we need to think about how we do it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a woman that I admire, and we all know she recently passed. One of her quotes is, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." And with that, I want to lastly give an example of someone calling me 2 months ago because an anti-racist educator was hired to come and do work in her organization. And this individual really went, tore to pieces every white person that was in the room, to the point where she instructed the white individuals to give up their salary so that people from racialized background could get those salaries. That's not what I'm after. We need allies to be able to do this work. We need people to support this work. People from racialized backgrounds cannot do this work on themselves, by themselves. We need to do it in such a way that the way we portray ourselves, the way we carry ourselves, the way we talk about this very difficult topic will lead others to join us to address that. So with that, I would like to end, open it up for a few questions. I know we went and spoke a lot, but I had to set the stage for next week. So if there are a few questions, please go ahead and I'll take them if it's through chat box or if you want to unmute. I'm not quite sure. Sybil, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Linda. So far, I don't see any questions, but just a comment for healthcare professionals, it is important to address racism as a determinant of health. So that was one of their comments as we went along. Okay, so we do have one question. Linda, do you want me to read it or?
Yes, please go ahead.
With reference to your remark, role of service providers in supporting immigrants, it appears that they are particularly in healthcare working on the principles of equality, which in a way is good, but considering that we are a country with very diverse communities and ethnicity, the emphasis should be more on equity. That is my view. What is your opinion?
So we could dig deeper into it next week. But when we talk about, when you refer to equality and you look at equity, it's really dependent on how you perceive your services. Equity, equitable services is what we should strive towards. That's my personal opinion. And next week, I will dismantle that and go into more details about it, because I even have a visual about what equity, how equity is perceived. So thank you, Anil, for bringing this up. So for sure, we will go further with this.
So another chat question. Are we responsible for providing a space of cultural safety for those we serve?
I would say absolutely. Because if people come into a space, and it's not just for people we serve, it should also be for our peers. Because as we enter that space, and it isn't culturally safe to engage in either accessing services or having conversations, people won't come back and people won't build meaningful relationships. So it's one for people we serve, yes, but for peers as well. So absolutely, I would say the person that brought this up, we are responsible to bring it up in the organization. We're responsible to make it meaningful, and there are particular ways of doing it within your organization, but also on a personal level. So yes, I would say that.
Thank you, Linda. So another question, how do we go about to influence others to join us, especially in our own community?
That's a tough one. How do we go about to do it? One of the things that I have learned is you do things by setting an example. So sometimes it is great to talk about it, but talk sometimes becomes meaningless, especially if people can't see what you're doing. And so it takes a long time to get where you need to be. One of the things I tell people is we need to be strategic, because sometimes we jump and we do things and we're not very thoughtful about it, and we hurt more than we would add. So what I would say is, one, you need to have a plan. You need to be strategic. You need to know the community, especially because this was framed in a community component. You need to know the community. You need to know the players in the community, and you need to work with individuals in the community to get, and you need to really tease out, what does the community want? There's one thing, what do you want to see, but what does the community want? How can I work with them? What is the community's vision in terms of this particular issue, and how can we strategically address this? And the reason I keep talking about being strategic and having a plan is because sometimes some of us, many of us actually, I've done it as well, we get up and start doing things without having a very detailed plan, a strategy to get where you need to be. So then when oppositions and barriers, you start encountering them, you let go. But when you're strategic and you're aware that things might happen and the community is behind you, it can become easier.
So Linda, I don't know if you'll have time to answer this. Could you say a little more about cultural humility?
I would, but could we do it next time? Because part of cultural competency and cultural humility, and then we'll tease that out. I'm just thinking about the time. We have 6 minutes. I would love to, but because I'm addressing it next week, wondering if that would work.
Okay, so I'm going to read the last comment and then we'll go to closing remarks. Do you have resources supporting helping conversations about racism in the workplace with colleagues? I feel we need to start inside the workplace so we can do better with our clients.
This is such a good point. Thank you for bringing it up. So, in terms of those particular resources, I feel like that's the practical application of this conversation. One of the things, I'll give an example. Last Friday, I did a talk, and this particular individual that joined was from the US. And this individual provided um, uh, her experiences in terms of in the organization she works, her colleagues making the racist remarks and towards her. And so we did talk about how to address them and how to start the conversation. So just because this was asked, I'm just gonna say a little bit about it and then continue next week. Having any conversations about racism is very difficult. I'll take an example of myself. I felt like an individual, the way he was talking to me at work, it wasn't only because of the fact that I was a woman, but I felt he did it because I was a Black woman. So from manager to manager, I felt oppressed. When I tried talking to this individual about it privately. So, for one, I never talk to people about this in an open forum. I ask for a conversation, I let them know what it will be about. When I talked to this individual, they couldn't see it. I did my due diligence. What was happening to me is when I had meetings set up with this person, I was on high alert. My stress and anxiety went up, etc., etc. I had to take power and control back from that situation in that encounter with this individual.
So I know we don't have enough time. There's some really good.
But I like the next question that the person has posed. What is the importance of subjectivity, not being Black myself or I'll say from a racialized background? Can I help with issues faced by this biracial community? Definitely. I'm going to tell you something. My board of directors for my not-for-profit foundation is historically over 60%. I would even, my husband and I would be the only people from racialized background. There are so many ways, and we could talk about it, of how you could be an ally, how you could be an accomplice is another terminology that is used. So I'll go into it. So Mylene, if it's possible to screenshots these questions so I can bring them forward next time and use them for practical application.
Definitely, Linda, we will send you these comments and questions so that maybe you can incorporate into your next webinar. So having said that, thank you, Linda, for your thought-provoking and inspiring presentation. Our journey on equity and equality, as well as cultural competency, has a long, long way to go. But hopefully, by working together, we will create these pathways and have some changes at both institutional and individual level. We are looking for allies, we're looking for champions and accomplices that you mentioned. We are looking at ways of being inspired, and we hope to create this journey and the dialogue going. So thank you again, Linda. It was amazing, and we look forward to the next one. Please mark your calendars for October 6th, the same time. We'd also like to thank each one of you for taking the time to join us today. We feel the need for this educational component on cultural competency to increase your knowledge. We're great that service providers and practitioners have joined us today. Especially, we want to have this dialogue going. We want to have this understanding on cultural competency, especially as it relates to racialized groups in Ottawa and in Ontario. So once again, thank you for attending. Thank you, Linda. Thank you for our funders, Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, and New Horizons for Seniors. The Social Planning Council wants to thank you again. All our information will be on the webinar that I had sent the link for before. Have a good afternoon, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks everybody, and I also would like to thank my friend Ann Phillips, who did a lot of research in a few of the slides. So I'll see everybody next week.
Yep. Thank you, Linda, once again.
Yep.
Bye-bye, everyone.